Today, we decide what we eat based on what is considered to be healthy and what tastes good. This hasn't changed since the 16th century, but the idea of what foods are healthy has shifted, and today, ingredients, particularly spices, are readily available to us and not separated from us by huge oceans. Let's take a small look into the diet of an upper class person in Europe in the 16th century. Today, I'm going to show you how to make a common dish called blancmange. You may have heard of a dessert called blancmange that is a milky pudding. This dish from the 16th century is not that blancmange. It is a dish made with rice, chicken, almond milk, and some spices. To start off, we need to take our chicken and boil it on the stove. Next, we want to cook the rice. You'll need about 4 cups of cooked rice, which is approximately 2 cups of uncooked rice. Now, in the 1500s, they did not have fancy rice cookers, gas stoves, electric teapots, or food processors, but I chose to still use these appliances to create this dish because I did not have the time to stand around and chop almonds for 25 minutes. The next thing we need to do is to make almond milk. Today, if you went to the store and bought a container of almond milk, there would be more than just 2 ingredients in it. It would contain sugar, and a whole bunch of other preservatives as well. In the 16th century, they did not have all that. Almond milk was almonds and water. And so for this dish, I decided to make my own almond milk. It's actually quite simple. Take your almonds and chop them up really, really fine so they're almost like a flour. As you can see in the video, I started with a knife and then got impatient and ground them up in a food processor. It went a lot quicker that way. Then you're going to soak your almond powder in hot water for 10 to 15 minutes, and after it's finished soaking, you'll strain out the flesh of the almonds that's left over, and what you'll have is almond milk. Now let's prepare our spices. We are going to use sugar, salt, ginger, and white pepper. Only a small amount of each spice is used during this time because these spices were hard to come by and expensive. In the 16th century, sugar and other spices came to Europe all the way from Asia. Sugar first came to Europe in 1100 and was reaching its height of being used as a spice in the middle of this century. Sugar was used by the wealthy, and not only to flavor food, but also to show off their wealth. The next step in our food making process is to take the chicken and shred it as fine as you can using 2 forks. Let's take a moment to talk about why people ate the things they did during this time period. A major factor in determining what people ate was their belief that the 4 liquids called humors circulated the body. This idea stemmed from medical texts in Greece from many centuries before. The Corpus Hippocrateum contains texts written around 400 BC discussing this idea of humors. The liquids, blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, corresponded to the 4 elements and the 4 seasons. Blood correlated to air and spring, yellow bile to fire and summer, black bile to earth and fall, and phlegm to water and winter. Additionally, each humor was either hot or cold and either wet or dry. For example, blood was considered to be hot and wet. Why would these ideas affect what people ate? Well, it was believed that large deviations from the proper balance of hot, cold, wet, and dry would cause illness. To prevent imbalance, people would eat food accordingly. It was believed that foods also fell onto the spectrum of hot, cold, wet, or dry. So, people who were considered to be too wet and cold would need to eat foods that were considered to be hot and dry to balance themselves out. Levels of hot and cold, wet, and dry varied for each person and depended on location and biological factors. Let's take an example of a biological factor. Elderly people were considered to be colder and drier than normal, and women during their menstrual cycles were considered to be colder and wetter. To fix this imbalance, older people would eat warmer and wetter foods than young people, and women would eat warmer and drier foods than men. Remember that large deviations from what was considered to be the desirable balance were bad, but interestingly, small deviations from this norm were thought to govern a person's disposition or temperament. For example, it was believed that someone who was more melancholic had black bile as a dominant humor in their body. As I mentioned previously, another thing that determined what people ate was simply some things were not available. In the 1500s, there was less variety in food. In this dish, we used chicken, rice, almonds, and some spices, including sugar. Not all of these ingredients were grown in or native to Europe. Some research studies have suggested that chickens were originally brought from Asia and first domesticated in parts of northern China, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. Rice was imported from Asia and was first brought to Europe in the 1500s. Almonds have a much longer history in Europe than rice. They came from the Middle East and were spread throughout Europe by Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians. Archaeologists have found that almonds have been in Greece since 8000 BC. And as previously discussed, sugar and other spices came from Asia as well. The difficulty and the consequent expense that these ingredients came at and the limited nature of their supply meant that not everyone could afford to make blancmange. Only the wealthy and the upper class could afford these luxuries. To finish off this dish, as I have shown in the video, simply combine the chicken, rice, almond milk, and spices in a pot, add about a cup of water, and heat on the stove until it becomes thick. After everything is combined and heated, we are finished. This dish is best served hot. If you recreate this recipe, be sure to share the food and the facts with your friends.